43 seconds. That's how long the security camera footage shows Dariusz Kowalczyk standing at the intercom panel of his business partner's building on Ulica Swidnica in Wrocław, Poland, at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2018. 43 seconds, pressing the entry code correctly on the first attempt for a building he swore under oath he had never been given access to. He didn't run. He didn't check whether anyone was watching. He walked in like he lived there. His business partner, Tomasz Bryl, was found 6 hours later by a neighbor, unconscious on his kitchen floor. For broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone. Dariusz Kowalczyk had no memory of leaving his apartment that night. Not partial memory, not fragments, nothing. The camera had 23 minutes of footage. He had 0 seconds of it. That's where this starts. The case that genuinely broke me open on this. And I mean that the way you mean it when something changes the shape of how you think about everything else, was Dariusz Kowalczyk's. But to understand it, you need the timeline. All of it. Dariusz was 41 years old in March 2018. Structural engineer. Methodical by every account. His wife, Agnieszka, described him as someone who checked the door lock twice before bed every night. Not from anxiety, she said, just from precision. He had worked with Tomasz Bryl for 11 years, built a mid-sized civil engineering firm from almost nothing. By documented accounts, their relationship was under strain that winter. A dispute over contract proceeds, falsified billing hours alleged on both sides, but nothing anyone described as volatile. On March 6, 2018, Dariusz went to bed at 10:44 p.m. His wife confirmed this. She fell asleep after midnight. He was beside her. She woke at 7:11 a.m. He was still there, asleep. He woke at 7:19 a.m. His shoes were wet. It had rained overnight. He didn't remember going out. He didn't think much of it. He made coffee. He went to work. At 4:47 p.m., 2 detectives knocked on his door. The camera footage from Ulica Swidnica was precise. At 2:47 a.m., a man matching Dariusz Kowalczyk exactly, height, build, posture, confirmed code, entered the building by punching the 6-digit code. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor. He knocked on apartment 3B. Tomasz Bryl opened the door. The hallway camera captured what happened in the next 4 seconds before the door closed. The man walked inside without speaking. The next 18 minutes and 47 seconds were not on camera. The apartment door opened again at 3:09 a.m. The same man exited, walked to the elevator, pressed ground floor, exited the building. The exterior camera caught him walking north on Swidnica at a normal pace. Not running, not looking behind him. Tomasz Bryl was found at 8:51 a.m. by his neighbor, Krystyna Wierzbicka, who had heard nothing the previous night. She mentioned this repeatedly to investigators. Nothing. No shouting. No impact. No furniture moved. Tomasz had crawled from his kitchen to the hallway at some point and stopped there. He survived. Dariusz Kowalczyk's defense was simple, complete, and entirely impossible to disprove. He said, "I was asleep. No, I didn't do it. Not the footage is wrong." He said, "I was in my bed. I have no memory of any of this, and I genuinely do not know how I entered a building I do not have the code for." His defense brought in Dr. Hanna Łukasiewicz-Pratt, a specialist in parasomnia disorders at the University of Wrocław's neurology department. She ran 23 separate cognitive and neurological tests, MRI, sleep study, full psychiatric evaluation. Her conclusion, in a 47-page report submitted to the court, Dariusz Kowalczyk presented a clinical profile consistent with parasomnia-related automatism, specifically what is medically classified as a non-insane automatism state. The prosecution's argument was simple. The behavior was too purposeful. He knew the code. He knocked. He entered. He left calmly. That's not unconscious behavior. Except, and here's where the question stops being legal, the code. Tomasz Bryl confirmed under oath he had never given Dariusz the building access code. Not once in 11 years. He'd changed it 8 months earlier after losing a key fob. Only 3 people had the new code: Tomasz, his girlfriend, and his mother. Dr. Łukasiewicz-Pratt wrote, carefully in clinical language, that the access code detail was, and I'm quoting from page 31 of her report, inconsistent with any conscious retention of information the defendant would be expected to possess. The jury deliberated for 9 days. Dariusz Kowalczyk was convicted. 16 months, suspended sentence. His attorney filed appeals for 3 years. I'm coming back to that verdict, to what it means, because the cases I found next make it look like it was drawn from a hat. Anneliese Bortolotti, 34 years old, pediatric nurse, Turin, Italy, November 14, 2015. Her boyfriend, Marco Delucci, parked his car in an underground garage at Via Roma on the evening of November 13th. He used that garage infrequently, twice, maybe 3 times in the past 8 months. Always paid cash. No record of him as a regular. Anneliese, by her own account and that of Marco's friends, had never accompanied him there. She didn't drive regularly. She had no reason to know the garage existed. At 3:34 a.m. on the 14th, Marco's car caught fire. The investigators' report confirmed accelerant, a small amount applied deliberately to the rear passenger seat. The garage's internal camera captured a woman entering from the street stairwell at 3:19 a.m., walking directly to the vehicle, performing what appeared to be a focused and specific task at the rear door, and leaving at 3:26 a.m. 7 minutes. No hositashchen. Anneliese Bortolotti woke up that morning with the smell of smoke in her hair and no memory of leaving her apartment. Toxicology clean. No psychiatric history. No history of violence. Her prescribing doctor confirmed she had been on 3.75 milligrams of Zopiclone for approximately 6 weeks. Work-related insomnia, short-term prescription, standard dosage. The clinical literature on Zopiclone-induced parasomnia is substantial enough to fill 2 shelves. The court in Turin acquitted her on grounds of automatism. Marco Delucci told a journalist afterward that he still didn't fully believe it. I understand why. I'm not sure I believe it either. I'm also not sure I don't. Then there is Reginald Osei-Bonsu, 52 years old, senior accountant, Borough of Lewisham, London. On September 3, 2020, at 3:12 a.m., he entered the flat of a co-worker named Paul Ajay in Deptford. Paul had given him a spare key months earlier during a plumbing emergency, never asked for it back, and stabbed him 7 times. Paul Ajay survived. The forensic pathologist noted that all 7 wounds were non-fatal and that the strikes were, and this word appears 4 times in 3 pages, deliberate, controlled, concentrated. Reginald Osei-Bonsu presented the same defense. No memory. Total absence. He woke in his own bed. No prior psychiatric history. His sleep specialist submitted a report consistent with parasomnia-automatism. The court found him guilty of grievous bodily harm with intent. 7 years. He is still in Belmarsh as of the last confirmed information I have. And then Mira Tanaka-Westergaard, 28 years old, freelance translator, Copenhagen, Denmark, February 7th, 2021. She had been divorced from Henrik Westergaard for just under 2 years. The separation was calm by all accounts. No restraining orders, no documented incidents. On the night of February 6th into the 7th, Mira drove 47 kilometers from her apartment in Frederiksberg to Henrik's new house in Roskilde. She had never been to his new address. He moved after the divorce. The address was not in her phone contacts. Investigators confirmed this. She arrived at 4:03 a.m., rang the doorbell, and when Henrik opened the door, she was standing on his porch in her nightgown and bare feet in -4 degrees, holding her car keys. No memory of having driven there. Henrik Westergaard didn't call the police. He called an ambulance. No charges filed. No trial. No conviction. Same profile. Same behavior. Same medical picture. For countries. For completely different outcomes. The psychiatric and legal framework for all of this has a name. It's called automatism. Within that, more specifically, non-insane automatism, which sounds like a legal fiction invented by clever defense attorneys until you actually read the clinical literature, which I spent approximately 4 months doing. Non-insane automatism, in legal terms, means the person performed the act was real, but the mind directing it was not, in any clinically meaningful sense, conscious, not impaired, not intoxicated, not psychotic, absent. The neuroscience of this is genuinely strange to read carefully. Researchers at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience in London and separately at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm have documented that during certain parasomnia events, the motor cortex, the region executing movement, can remain highly active while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment, planning, awareness of consequences, and crucially, the encoding of memory, is functionally offline. The brain runs behavioral programs without the part that would notice it's doing so. And these programs can be remarkably complex. That's the part that's hardest to absorb. Walking, driving, responding to stimuli, navigating known environments. These can all occur. The body remembers. The self does not. A 2019 paper in the journal Consciousness and Cognition documented what researchers called implicit memory access during parasomnia, a phenomenon in which a person in this state retrieves information that was learned but never consciously encoded. Things seen once, fleetingly. A code entered in their presence. An address glimpsed on a screen. For about 3 months, I found that enough. There's a mechanism. Doctors have a name for it. The brain does strange things during certain sleep states. Fine. Except Anneliese Bortolotti drove to a garage she had never been to a vehicle she had been in twice, using accelerant that investigators never located in her apartment. They found no accelerant anywhere in her flat. They never determined where it came from. Reginald Osei-Bonsu's strikes were deliberate. The forensic pathologist used that word 4 times. Deliberate means targeting. Deliberate means something was choosing. And Dariusz Kowalczyk knew a code he had never been given. The mechanism explains the behavior. It does not explain the knowledge. Here is the thing I keep returning to. The thing I handed to 3 different people: a forensic psychiatrist, a criminal defense attorney, and a neuroscientist who asked me not to name her, and none of them have given me a satisfying answer. In 3 of the 4 cases, and in 7 additional documented cases I found across court records in 6 countries, the person in a fugue or parasomnia state demonstrated access to specific, intimate, non-public information that their conscious self demonstrably did not possess. Dariusz. A building code changed 8 months prior, shared with 3 people, none of whom were him. Anneliese. The precise location of a parking garage her boyfriend used occasionally, paid cash, never mentioned to her. I confirmed this. Through an intermediary, I spoke with Marco Delucci. He was specific. He had never taken her there. He had never mentioned the street name. He has no explanation for how she knew where to go. And then there is Piripi Ngata, 44 years old, construction supervisor, Auckland, New Zealand. August 2017. He drove during a parasomnia episode to the house of a former colleague he hadn't spoken to in 6 years, an address he had visited exactly once for 20 minutes in 2011. When investigators cross-referenced his route with GPS data recovered from his phone, the path he took was not the obvious one, not the default route. He avoided a road closure that had been announced the previous Thursday in a local council bulletin. A road closure he had no documented reason to have read. His conscious mind hadn't processed it. His fugue state knew about it. I don't know what to do with that. I've been sitting with it for months, and I genuinely, functionally do not know what it means. The neuroscientist who asked not to be named told me that the current model of implicit memory doesn't account for it. Implicit memory is encoded through repetition, emotional salience, sensory experience. A road closure bulletin read once, briefly, in passing. That is not how implicit memory works. That is not what survives the transition from conscious processing to motor automatism. She said, and I wrote it down immediately. The data you're describing would require the sleeping mind to have access to a memory architecture we haven't located yet. A memory architecture we haven't located yet. She said it calmly. Scientists don't alarm easily. But I've been hearing that sentence for 4 months, and I haven't been able to set it down. What is accessing the information? Not who, what? Because if it's not the conscious self, and in all of these cases the conscious self is verifiably, clinically absent, then something else is navigating. Something that knows the building code. something that knows the parking garage, something that knows which roads closed on a Thursday in Auckland. And whatever it is, it's using the body methodically, specifically, without hesitation. I've tried to find the moment in each case where the behavior became too purposeful to be automatic, the line prosecutors always draw. And I can't find it, because purposefulness isn't evidence of consciousness. It's evidence of a goal. And the question no one says out loud in a courtroom is this: whose goal is it? I need to tell you something I didn't plan to include. I'm including it because I think you're owed it, and because I don't know how to keep talking about this honestly without saying it. 6 months into this research, I was prescribed zolpidem, 10 milligrams. I had been sleeping badly for a long time. Not coincidentally, I think, given I was spending my evenings reading court transcripts about what people do when their sleeping minds take over. My GP said it was standard. Short term. I took it for 11 nights. On the 8th morning, I woke up and my laptop was open on my desk. I don't work at my desk in the evening. I work on the couch, and I always put the laptop away before sleeping. Without exception, the browser had a tab open, a section of the forensic pathologist's report from the Osei-Bonsu case that had not been in the public filing, a supplementary document I had been trying to access for 2 days. I checked my sent folder. An email had gone out at 3:07 a.m. to a court records clerk in Lewisham, requesting supplementary documentation from the case file. The email referenced the correct case number, used the right legal terminology, was more coherent than most emails I write when I'm fully awake. I have no memory of writing it, not a fragment. I sat with that for 3 days. The rational explanation is clear. I woke partially in a fog, sent the email half asleep, and went back to sleep. That is almost certainly what happened. Zolpidem does this. It's documented. It has a clinical name, sleep-related complex behavior. It has been the subject of manufacturer litigation. But I had spent 6 months learning that the rational explanation is not always the load-bearing structure everyone assumes it is. Wait, and I mean this carefully, I'm not claiming I'm a case. I'm not Dariusz Kowalczyk. I'm not Reginald Osei-Bonsu. What happened to me was a known pharmaceutical side effect. That's almost certainly all it was. Still, I kept the email. It's in a folder on my desktop, labeled with the date. I look at it sometimes, not to disturb myself, but because I think it's important to remember there's a version of me that exists in the hours I don't have access to. A version that can write, navigate, locate, request. I don't know what that version wants. So what do we actually do with this? Legally, practically. If you're a judge in Wrocław and the footage is undeniable and the medical evidence is credible and the man standing in front of you genuinely does not know how he entered a building he had no access to, what do? Dariusz Kowalczyk was convicted. Reginald Osei-Bonsu is in Belmarsh. Anneliese Bortolotti was acquitted. Mira Tanaka-Westergaard was never charged. For cases, the same core profile, for completely different outcomes. The automatism defense is not recognized consistently in any international legal framework. In England and Wales, it's narrowly available, but insane automatism, caused by internal factors including sleep disorders, leads not to acquittal but to indefinite commitment under a special verdict. In Italy, parasomnia-automatism has been recognized in multiple cases since 2011. In Poland, the evidentiary standard for mental incapacity is different again. In New Zealand, Piripi Ngata was convicted of dangerous driving and trespass. No parasomnia defense accepted because the prosecution argued that route avoidance of a road closure demonstrated strategic reasoning. Same behavior, same medical profile. Innocent in one jurisdiction, 7 years in another. Justice, in these cases, doesn't operate on fact. It operates on geography. And if you follow that to where it actually leads, there are people in prison right now for things they did not consciously do in countries where the legal framework is not equipped to process that fact. Not a few isolated cases. The parasomnia literature estimates complex behavioral automatism occurs in approximately 2.3% of the adult population at least once in a lifetime. The courts have processed a fraction of those events. What I can't stop thinking about, and I'm going to say this plainly because I'm tired of being careful about it, is the question of moral weight. not legal. Moral. If your hand commits an act your mind didn't order in any meaningful sense of the word, are you responsible? Every framework of ethics I'm aware of ties culpability to intent, to knowledge, to the moment where a choice could have been made differently. In genuine automatism, there is no such moment. The arm moves, the feet walk, the code is entered, and somewhere in a bed 2.3 kilometers away, the self is absent. Where does it go? That is not rhetorical. Neurologically, clinically, where is the self during those 23 minutes? Dr. Łukasiewicz-Pratt's report uses the phrase functional dissociation of conscious monitoring from motor execution. What that means in plain language, the monitoring stopped. Something else was running. Dariusz Kowalczyk served his suspended sentence. He still works in engineering. I confirmed this through a professional network listing last updated 11 months ago. He gave one interview in 2019 to a regional outlet and said only that he thinks about it every day and that he still doesn't know how he knew the code. I believe him. That is the most important thing I can say here. Not because I think he's innocent of the act is on camera, the act happened, but because I think the question of whether he is guilty is one our current frameworks are genuinely not designed to answer. And it will keep being unanswerable as long as we insist that the body and the self are always the same thing. Maybe they're not. Maybe there's a version of each of us that operates in the hours we don't have access to, that knows things we don't consciously know, that moves toward things we aren't consciously choosing. The numbers don't change when I look away from them. And that's where we are. For cases. For countries. Dariusz Kowalczyk still doesn't know how he knew the code. Reginald Osei-Bonsu has been in Belmarsh for 4 years. Somewhere in a Wrocław court archive, a 47-page forensic report ends on the phrase, inconsistent with any conscious retention. Nobody followed up on what that means. Next week, we go further. One case, one person who was acquitted and vanished 6 weeks later. If the code, 6 digits, correct on the first attempt, at 2:47 a.m., stayed with you, the comments are open. Subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Turn the lights off. Press play. Don't hang up. Shadow tapes.